I'm Charles Clark. I'm a real enthusiast for identity cards and for strong national databases, both now as a backbench Member of Parliament and when I was a Home Secretary. Some people argue that there are concerns about civil liberties with these proposals, but I believe that in fact they protect us against those who seek to steal our identity and abuse our liberty. Plans to store details about everyone in the country on central databases, called the National Identity Register, are highly controversial among the chattering classes. So are the plans for everyone to carry a summary of those details on ID cards. Who will be able to see the data? How will we know it's correct? What use will be made of it? I think there are ways to allay all these concerns, and I hope the government will examine them. First, we need to prove that amassing data about all of us will do more good than harm. For me, there's an obvious example: the police's national DNA database. It's already proved its worth in catching more criminals. I'm on my way to see someone who was sexually attacked in her home whilst asleep in bed. But it took 14 years for Fionn Gunn's attacker to be identified, because we didn't have a national DNA database at that time.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you for doing this today.
You're welcome.
Can you tell me what happened and how the police did in trying to solve it?
Well, first thing I knew, I was being beaten awake, and a man had sort of hoisted me up in the bed and was hitting my face, and he was screaming at me and saying, "I want to have sex with you, and if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to kill your children." And I remember just feeling ice cold inside, really, and he hit me again, and I then just thought, I just said, yeah, I can't remember why I thought of it, but I just said, "Oh, but I'm sorry, I've got an infection." And he got very sort of wound up when I said this, but he did sort of back off immediately, and then he asked me to have oral sex with him, and I thought, okay, damage limitation, so I said yes, and the whole thing was over in a minute or two. When he finished, he went to the door and just said, "Well, cheerio, thanks a lot, love," you know, as if he'd called in for a cup of coffee or something, and as soon as he went out the door, I spat his semen into the kitchen roll and called the police.
So you had no means of identifying him at all? He was a total stranger?
No, he was a total stranger. I had no idea who he was.
So really all you could give to the police, other than the description, was the contents of the tissue which you'd spat out.
Yes,
and
that's right.
Could they use that effectively?
The police officer who was dealing with my case, Glyn, he said, "I have to warn you that our current database is very, very limited." And it was tested, and sure enough, there were no matches to it.
Were they ever able to find a match between that DNA that you'd taken and the criminal?
Well, for years I didn't hear anything. Then, ring at the door, I go down and I see these two women, and she says, "Oh, I'm a police officer," and shows me her identification. And I said, "Do come in," and she said, "There's nothing to worry about, it's about something that's happened in the past." And I thought, yes, they've got him.
The Forensic Science Service only found a match for Fionn's attacker years later, because his DNA was put on the database for more recent conviction. He's now serving 8 years in jail. When the National DNA Database was first set up in 1995, it was only allowed to retain samples from convicted criminals. When I was Home Secretary, the rules changed to allow the police to keep all the DNA samples they collect, from the innocent and guilty alike. And so it's cleared up many more cases.
Well, since the legislation changed in 2001, over 200,000 profiles have been retained on the DNA database from people that previously would have had those profiles removed. Now that's led to in excess of 13,000 new matches, of which over 500 of those are against serious crimes, including murders and rapes.
The DNA database is just a means of identifying us by our own personal DNA. Unless we're criminals, we've nothing to fear from it. These days, we all have to identify ourselves in various ways, dozens of times a day. It's my passport, my Oyster card, my driving licence, my organ donor card, my credit and debit cards, my season ticket to Norwich City, my Labour Party membership card, my library card, and it's not just these. I also have a host of PIN numbers and passwords and the like, which I use to protect my identity every day.
But these traditional forms of proving our identity are under attack. Identity fraud costs us £1.7 billion a year, and it's growing fast. I believe we need a much more secure method of proving we are who we say we are. That's why the government is introducing identity cards. By 2010, everyone will need to have one to get a passport. They'll take identity security to a whole new level by using biometric data. That means they will carry unique physical information about you, a scan of the shape of your face, your 10 fingerprints, and eventually your irises.
Please look into the mirror. Please open your eyes wider.
This will be placed on the card and the National Identity Database. So whenever you need to prove your identity, whether it's in the bank or online, a reader will compare your physical features with the ones on the card. It's like chip and pin, but your body is your PIN code, so no one can steal it.
Clark, OK.
There we are.
I wish lots of people said Clark, OK. That's what I need, lots of positive recognition.
Anybody who knows or who steals the PIN number can use it, so it's not bound to the person. Biometrics is bound to the person, and I cannot give you my face for verification.
You are your identity.
Right.
By stamping out the scourge of illegitimate identity, we'll be assured that everyone is just whom they are meant to be. Indeed, without one you'll become a practical non-entity. It is the card that proves you have a national identity.
When I brought in these plans for biometric ID cards, critics from across the political spectrum rounded on me, suggesting I was bringing in a police state. This cartoon may be amusing, but much of the language of this debate has been pretty offensive.
Our freedom will be guaranteed so long as they know where we are. Our freedom will be guaranteed so long as they know where we are.
Words like totalitarianism, Stalinism, Gulag have been used of this democratic government.
This is my wife's family. They're from Estonia, which was formerly run by the Soviet Union. The KGB killed her grandfather, her grandmother, and her uncle in the early 1940s. That was the reality of an oppressive dictatorship. So you'd expect Estonia, of all places, to reject anything that smacked of totalitarianism. And yet 5 years ago, they introduced one of the most advanced identity card systems in the world. After liberation, the Estonians set up a museum of occupation so that future generations might never forget the horrors they suffered. The Soviets arrested about 80,000 people, sending many of them to the Gulag, including many of my wife's family. Indrek Torrent was a vehement opponent of the Soviets, not at all the kind of person you'd expect to support identity cards.
What these books show is the immense number of people who were arrested or deported from Estonia, and it reaches into every part of Estonian life. And Indrek, you've got family here who this tells the story of their lives.
Yeah, this is my grandfather. He was arrested and beaten twice every day for 80 days, and then he has written later that on the 80th day I decided that if they asked me whether I am a Chinese emperor, I would confess that I am. So he confessed that he was a British spy, that he wanted to invite British submarines to the lake of Harku, which would be impossible because this lake is not connected to a sea. But nevertheless, in my case, yeah, he came back, but every third of them or every fourth depends on the page. They died there. They just died there.
With all the information that exists about everybody today, in medical files, in DNA databases, ID cards, passports, people are very worried in some parts of Britain that some kind of totalitarian threat exists because of this information. How do you feel about that compared with your own experiences of totalitarianism?
It gives me more security than under the Soviet authority, because under the Soviet regime, the three KGB guys could come and say, this guy is a rapist. We saw him raping a girl. This girl doesn't exist, but they have three, you have one, and you will be sent to prison.
And no ability to prove your innocence.
Yeah, exactly. But here I could at least make an argument. Look, I used my ID card in Tartu paying for gas. So those three guys would probably lose the case. So in a way it gives me more security.
So you don't see the ID card as a totalitarian device. You see it as a means of protecting you to some extent against other people abusing your identity.
Right. Here in Estonia, I think the only people who are not very enthusiastic about the ID card are former communists, because they love the monopoly of information and distributing it on their own evil purposes.
Yes.
Whereas ID card gives me, as a citizen, as an ordinary man, access to the same information.
As well as enabling Estonians to check official information held about them, ID cards make online transactions more secure. Estonians like Rino Banik, an advertising producer, have to insert their ID cards as well as key in their PIN numbers to use online services.
Hi, nice to see you.
Well, when I'm connected like this, when it really actually identifies my card and then I put in the security codes and everything, then I can be sure that it's me using it, because those numbers and codes, nobody else would know.
Reen's ID card is far more powerful than those currently planned for Britain. We've blurred her details here, but her card enables her to see all the information stored about her by almost every government agency, and some private organisations too.
Here we have all of the hospital system, the healthcare system, my tax office, what type of vehicles and if insurances are paid, pension, then where I'm registered to vote and where I'm registered to live.
So it's basically all the information you in any case had to give to the government about you on the land register or the car register,
Yes.
whatever. Here it is available to you at the click of a finger
Yes.
to see exactly what data they hold about
Exactly.
you.
It's fantastic because you can check it any time of the day and you can check that if the information is right.
Yeah. Access to Reen's records is strictly limited, and officials must use their own ID cards to get it, so she can see exactly who's looked at her records.
We found it for you here.
The only person who's trying to find information out about you is you.
Yeah, right now. So it
Do you find
shows
that
it
depressing? Do you
registers.
want lots of people to find information about you?
Well, doesn't really. There's nothing to hide.
Nothing to hide.
Nothing to hide.
It's much more empowering than the system proposed in the UK, which would give us only limited access to our own data. I'm sure that one of the big reasons why the Estonian identity card system works is its transparency. Everybody can check entirely what is on their database about them, and that means that they trust the system as a whole. Of course, the Estonians continually update the security of their system to keep ahead of the criminals. So they're starting to trial biometric identification this year. I think the British identity card system needs to get far nearer to what's being achieved in Estonia. We need a situation where every individual can look at the government databases about them, so far as that's possible, and where every citizen can see who else has been accessing their own data files. That's the way to protect civil liberties for every citizen. And I think we should make a start now by using ID cards to protect that most controversial of government databases, the spine, our health records.
The most personal of all the official files held about us are our medical records. Prying eyes could uncover information that could be used to threaten a career or a relationship. But instant access to this same information through a computerised national database could also save your life.
Some years ago, my mother nearly died. She was admitted to hospital very late at night in a crisis situation. They didn't have the basic data about her medical history, her drug treatments, and so on. That wouldn't have happened had there been a national medical records database.
My mother survived, but Penny Campbell died because of a lack of access to her medical records.
5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Her 6-year-old son Joe is being brought up by her partner Angus McKinnon on his own. 8 out of our doctors in succession failed to spot that Penny was developing a life-threatening infection after a routine operation for hemorrhoids. None of them had access to her full medical records, so they couldn't accurately assess how her symptoms were getting worse.
Penny was finally admitted to hospital on Easter Monday. When we went in, she was ill, but we certainly didn't think her life was in danger, and that was something that changed very quickly because from being handled by the junior house doctors, we were very quickly in the hands of consultants, and intensive care bed was being prepared for Penny. What I now know is that it was already too late at that point, that the septicemia was overwhelming her system, and Penny went into intensive care. She never recovered consciousness, and all her organs failed, and she died the next morning. A 41-year-old with a 6-year-old son.
Terrible. Do you feel that a coherent, coordinated, single record might have made a difference to the outcome, might have enabled Penny's life to be saved?
In Penny's case, I think if the doctors had a fuller picture, a full record of those symptoms, they might have thought differently. Alarm bells might have gone off earlier, and in a case involving septicemia, it's really early diagnosis is the absolute key, so potentially that could have saved Penny's life.
Tragedies like this have led the government to start setting up a computerised central database for our health records, called the Spine. If I fell ill now and my records were on the Spine, the doctors in this London hospital would have instant access to all my vital medical details. But a centralised system means that thousands of health workers could also have access to this highly personal information. GPs are so worried about its security that half of them say they won't put records on the Spine without each patient's explicit consent. And without this vital information, hospital doctors can't do their job properly.
Why on earth don't I know all the medicines that the patient's GP has prescribed? It's bonkers that I don't. Yes. The technology is with us now. What we've got, I think, are some very rather organised groups who have a real fear of any database. This is about health and saving lives. It's not about government snooping.
Patient confidentiality is an important aspect of a doctor's professional existence and training. Are there contradictions and problems there which you think need to be overcome, or are most doctors ready to go with this?
Well, I think we need a sea change in attitude. It needs to stop being our record, the hospital record. They're the patient's records. It's your health records to which I contribute. Okay? And I go a step further. To make sure they're right and they're accurate, you need open access to them via a secure internet connection or by getting a printout from your GP or whatever. And bear in mind, the paper records we use now, the fax machines that we spew notes out on, are hideously unconfidential.
I believe the solution lies in a system I saw in Estonia, but the government isn't yet suggesting for the UK. In Estonia, medical staff have to use their own personal ID cards to access the health records database. The system protects privacy by only allowing them to see details of their own patients.
Mattis, you're going to look at your patient records. What are you up to? How are you going to do it?
I need my ID card, and I just put it in my computer, ID card reader. Now I have to put my PIN code. Okay. And we have two profiles, me as a doctor and me as a patient. If I go to inside my as a doctor, here is my patients, my pills, all what I need as a GP.
Using their ID cards and security codes, Estonian patients can soon check who's been looking at their medical records.
If you found that somebody who shouldn't have been looking at your files was doing so, what could you do?
I can turn to the police and ask to check up why it is happened.
At a hospital, a paramedic's ID card will only authorise access to essential details, like blood groups or medications. Each health professional can only access what they need to know to do their job. Once the Estonians add biometric data to the ID cards, each individual's unique body patterns will provide a final guarantee they've authorised access. It's clear to me that to protect the UK's health records database and many other government databases, we should ensure that all access is controlled through biometric ID cards. And I think in the future, we should go even further to guarantee the security of our ID cards and databases. We need to add our most intimate and accurate biometric data.
It would be far better if we could move in the future, as technology allows, to including DNA, our own individual DNA, on that database to give ultimate security.
But I know this is controversial, as are ID cards and databases as a whole. One of their leading critics is Shami Chakrabarti, the Director of Liberty. Will my ideas to increase security and transparency meet her objections?
We know that in the 1930s, identity cards in Holland were used to racially profile and deliver the Jews. We know that it is possible to single people out in that way by old-style identity cards. We must also think about the even greater possibilities of abusing an ID card that has such a significant database behind it. The possibilities for racial and other forms of profiling have already been discussed in the legitimate context of counter-terror. Imagine how they could be discussed and implemented with less benign objectives.
In relation to all these databases, do you think, Shami, that the ability to see exactly who has access to your own database would be a protection?
Well, given that I do believe there have to be some databases, though I want them to be confined and purpose-specific, there have to be some databases, I think it would be a great benefit for the relationship of trust between individual and the state, or the private sector for that matter, if I could see behind the chip and pin or behind the biometric and see what others see when they're looking at a profile of me.
Some people believe that it's worth going beyond the biometrics that we're currently talking about to adding DNA to that. What do you feel about that?
DNA doesn't just tell you my name, isn't just potentially linked to another database. It's incredibly intimate information in itself. It could tell you my true parentage, whether I knew it or not. It could tell you all sorts of things about my health, life expectancy and so on. This is very personal information. Before we use it too casually as a routine identifier, let's weigh human dignity and personal privacy in the balance as well.
If it helps to solve crime, why do you believe it might be a problem for the DNA of totally innocent people to be on a database?
Well, under the present system, there is an inherent concern about arbitrariness and discrimination, because it isn't everyone on the database, it's young people. Surprise, surprise, we believe that 3 out of 5 black men in this country are on the database. It's people who've had their collar felt by the police, no matter how innocent. That is an inherent problem.
But I believe the way to stop this discrimination is simple. We should all put our DNA on the DNA database. Not just to help catch criminals, but in the future to be the ultimate biometric key to our identity and all the information held about us on databases. So I've asked to add my DNA to the 3.5 million others already on the database.
What I'm going to do now then, Charles, is I'm going to use this mouth swab to collect a scraping from inside your cheek. I'm going to take 2. It's pretty painless. Hundreds and hundreds of criminals have it done. Just open wide. Thank you.
The truth is that unless the government convinces everyone their data is safe, no one will accept ID cards.
In future, it might even be that as the technology and the science advances, adding DNA to our national identity database might give that ultimate security which will give everybody confidence of the benefits that can be provided for the whole society.